Word count, 6,847. The coffee burned before dawn, and Nola Vance took it as a warning she should have listened to. She stood in the staging house kitchen in Tombstone, staring at the blackened pot while women around her prepared for their own journeys west. Young women. Pretty women. The kind men actually wanted when they sent away for help. Nola was 43, with hands that looked like they'd fought every year twice, and a face that had forgotten how to arrange itself into anything soft. The agency woman, Mrs. Talbot, appeared in the doorway holding a telegram. "You're going to Hollow Creek," she said, not looking at Nola directly. "Cattleman named Hale. 3 children. Wife died in February." "What's he paying?" "Room, board, and $30 monthly if you last through harvest." Nola folded the telegram without reading it. She'd heard that tone before, the one that meant she was going somewhere other women had already refused. "What aren't you telling me?" Mrs. Talbot finally met her eyes. "The last woman quit after 4 days, said the place was cursed. Before that, 2 others didn't even make it off the stage. Took one look and paid their own fare back to town." "Why?" "Because it's dying, Miss Vance, the ranch, the man, all of it. His wife didn't just die. She wasted away over 6 months while he watched. Now he's trying to hold everything together with 3 babies and a spread that's falling apart faster than he can fix it. Most folks think he should just sell and move on." Nola picked up her bag. It wasn't heavy. 43 years of living and everything she owned fit into one carpet bag with room to spare. "When's the stage?" Mrs. Talbot blinked. "You're still going?" "Nobody else is going to." The older woman's expression shifted into something that might have been respect or pity. Hard to tell which. "Stage leaves in an hour. It's a 2-day journey. Rough road. The driver's name is Cook, and he drinks, so sit near the back if you value your spine." Nola nodded and walked out into the pre-dawn dark. Behind her, she heard Mrs. Talbot speaking to another woman. "Thank the Lord that one's finally off our hands. Been here 6 months. Nobody wants a woman that old unless they're desperate." The other woman laughed. Nola kept walking. Fuck. The stage rattled across country that looked like creation had given up halfway through. Rocks, dust, scrub brush clinging to nothing. 2 other passengers rode with her. A whiskey drummer who snored against the window and a thin woman in morning clothes who never spoke. Cook drove exactly as advertised. Drunk enough to be dangerous, sober enough to keep them mostly on the road. Every rut felt like God himself reaching up to slap the axles. On the second day, they stopped at a relay station where the horses got changed and the passengers got weak coffee and cornbread that tasted like flour and broken promises. The station keeper, an old man with one eye and tobacco stains in his beard, looked Nola over while she ate. "You heading to Hollow Creek?" "I am." "You the new housekeeper?" "That's right." He shook his head. "You're either brave or stupid. That place is a graveyard waiting to happen." "What makes you say that?" "Hale's a hard man. Always was. But since his wife died, he's gone somewhere else entirely. Doesn't talk, barely eats. Works himself until he collapses, then gets up and does it again. The kids are half wild. The ranch hands keep quitting because there's no money to pay them proper." "And the ranch itself?" "Falling apart. Cattle are thin. Fences are down. Half the territory thinks he's going to lose it all before winter. Vernon Crow's been circling like a buzzard, waiting to buy the land for nothing once Hale finally breaks." Nola set down her coffee. "Who's Vernon Crow? Trouble in a silk vest. Owns half the county already and wants the other half. Buys up dying ranches and flips them for profit. Been after Hollow Creek for 2 years, but Hale won't sell, pride mostly. That land's been in his family since before Arizona was even a territory." "Sounds like he needs help." The old man laughed, sharp and bitter. "What he needs is a miracle. What he's getting is you, Otumbaets." They reached Hollow Creek just before sunset on the 3rd day. The ranch sat alone against the horizon like something forgotten. The house was 2 stories, wood frame, with a porch that sagged on one side and windows that hadn't been washed in months. Outbuildings clustered nearby. Barn, stable, chicken coop, smokehouse, all of them listing slightly, like they were too tired to stand up straight anymore. Dust covered everything. Not the kind that comes from weather, but the kind that settles when people stop caring. Cook pulled the stage up to the front steps and climbed down stiffly. "This is it. Holler if you need me to wait." Nola stepped down, bag in hand, and looked at the house. No smoke from the chimney, no sound from inside. No sign of life except for a single horse tied near the barn and chickens scratching in the yard. The front door opened. Garrick Hale stepped onto the porch. He was younger than she expected, maybe 35. Tall, lean in the way men get when they forget to eat. Dark hair that needed cutting. Face like carved stone, all hard lines and no softness anywhere. His eyes were the worst part. Empty. Not sad, not angry, just empty. He looked at her for a long moment. Then his expression shifted into something worse than anger, disappointment. "You're the woman from the agency?" "Nola Vance." "How old are you?" "Old enough to know that's a rude question." His jaw tightened. "I requested someone young, someone who could keep up with 3 children and ranch work." "I can keep up." "You look like you've been keeping up with hard luck and not much else." Nola set her bag down. Behind her, Cook climbed back onto the stage, clearly eager to leave before things got uglier. "Mr. Hale, I've traveled 3 days to get here. I'm tired, I'm hungry, and I don't particularly care what you think I look like. You need help. I need work. We can stand here insulting each other, or you can show me where the kitchen is." For a moment, she thought he might actually tell her to get back on the stage. Then a child's cry came from inside the house. Thin, weak. The sound of something small and desperate. Garrick's face changed, not softer, but cracked, like hearing that cry physically hurt him. "That's Weston," he said. "The baby. He's been sick for a week." "Have you called a doctor?" "Doctor won't come out here anymore. Says I owe him too much already." Nola picked up her bag and walked past him into the house. The inside was worse than the outside. The front room smelled like old grief and older dust. Furniture was shoved against the walls like someone had stopped caring where things went. Dishes were piled in the kitchen, laundry spilled from baskets. The fireplace was cold and full of ash. A little girl stood in the hallway watching her, maybe 5 years old. Blonde hair tangled around a thin face. She wore a dress that was too small and hadn't been washed in days. "Who are you?" the girl whispered. "My name's Nola. What's yours?" "Clara." "It's nice to meet you, Clara. Where's your baby brother?" Clara pointed upstairs. Nola climbed the steps, which creaked under her weight. The second floor was darker, 3 bedrooms. She followed the sound of crying to the smallest one. The baby lay in a cradle near the window, maybe 8 months old. His face was flushed with fever, and his crying had gone hoarse. A boy, maybe 10, sat on the floor beside the cradle, staring at nothing. "You must be Eli," Nola said. The boy looked up. He had his father's eyes, empty in the same way. "Are you the new woman?" "I am." "The last one left because Papa yelled at her." "Did she deserve it?" Eli shrugged. "She kept trying to throw away Mama's things. Papa didn't like that." Nola knelt beside the cradle and touched the baby's forehead, burning up. She peeled back his blanket. His diaper was soaked and his skin was red with rash. "When did he eat last?" "This morning, I think. He won't take milk anymore, just cries." "Has your father tried water?" "I don't know." Nola stood and turned to find Garrick standing in the doorway. "He needs water, not milk. His fever's too high, and he needs a cool cloth on his head to bring the temperature down. When did you last change him?" Garrick's face went tight. "I've been managing the cattle. Eli's a child. This baby needs an adult. I know that. Then act like it." For a moment, real anger flashed across Garrick's face. Then it died just as quickly, leaving only exhaustion behind. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said quietly. "I've been trying, but I don't know what I'm doing anymore." Nola looked at him, really looked. She saw a man who'd been trying to outrun grief by working himself into the ground. She saw someone who'd forgotten how to ask for help because asking meant admitting he was drowning. She'd seen that face in the mirror plenty of times. "Go take care of your cattle," she said, not unkindly. "I'll take care of your children." Matyam. She worked through the night. First the baby. She boiled water, let it cool, and got small sips into him using a clean rag. She changed him, washed him, wrapped him in fresh blankets. His fever broke near midnight, and he finally fell into real sleep. Then Clara. The little girl had been living on bread and water for days. Nola searched the kitchen and found flour, lard, a bit of salt pork, and some wrinkled potatoes. She made a thin stew and coaxed Clara into eating half a bowl before the child fell asleep at the table. Eli was harder. He sat in the corner of the kitchen, watching her with those empty eyes. "You should eat something," Nola said. "I'm not hungry." "You look hungry." "I said I'm not." She filled a bowl and set it in front of him anyway. "Suit yourself, but it's there if you change your mind." 20 minutes later, the bowl was empty. Eli didn't say anything, just took it to the sink and went upstairs. Nola cleaned the kitchen, scrubbed the dishes, wiped down surfaces that probably hadn't been touched in weeks. She found a rat's nest under the sink and a bag of flour that had gone to weevils. Near dawn, Garrick came back inside. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and stared. The room was clean. The stove was lit. Coffee was brewing. Nola stood at the counter, kneading bread dough with hands that knew the rhythm by heart. "How's Weston?" he asked. "Fever broke. He's sleeping." "And the others?" "Fed, washed, in bed." Garrick pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. He looked like a man who'd been carrying a mountain and finally realized he could set it down. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what I said when you arrived. That wasn't fair." "No, it wasn't. The agency told me they were sending someone younger." "The agency sends whoever's willing to come. I was willing. Nobody else was." He nodded slowly. "Why? Why was I willing?" "Yes." Nola shaped the dough into a loaf and set it aside to rise. "Because I've been where your children are. I know what it's like when the adults stop fighting. When you're little and you realize nobody's coming to save you. That's a terrible thing for a child to learn." "You think I've stopped fighting?" "Haven't you?" Garrick looked at her across the kitchen. For the first time, something almost alive moved behind his eyes. "My wife died in this house," he said. "In the bedroom upstairs. She was sick for months, and I watched her fade a little more every day. By the end, she didn't even know who I was. The fever had taken everything. After she died, I kept thinking if I just worked hard enough, I could make everything normal again. But it doesn't work that way, does it?" "No, it doesn't." "So what do I do?" Nola poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of him. "You get up tomorrow and try again. And the day after that. And the day after that. You keep trying until one morning you wake up and realize you're not trying anymore. You're just living. And if I can't, then you let me help you." Bonk. Word spread fast. By the end of the first week, half the town knew Garrick Hale had hired a new housekeeper. The other half had opinions about it. Nola heard them when she went into Redemption for supplies. The town was small. One main street, general store, saloon, church, doctor's office, and a handful of houses scattered around like someone had tossed them and let them land wherever. She walked into Porter's general store and felt every conversation stop. The owner, a heavy man with mutton chops and suspicious eyes, looked her over. "You're the woman from Hollow Creek." "That's right. I need flour, sugar, lard, and coffee." "Cash or credit?" "Cash." That seemed to surprise him. He pulled out a ledger. "Hale's account is pretty thin. You sure he's good for this?" "I'm paying, not him." Porter raised an eyebrow but started gathering supplies. Behind Nola, 2 women whispered to each other near the fabric display. "That's her? She's older than I thought." "Exactly. Why would Garrick hire someone like that when he could have remarried by now?" "Maybe he's given up on finding anyone decent. Or maybe she's cheaper than a wife." Nola didn't turn around. She'd heard worse. But when Porter set the supplies on the counter, she made sure her voice carried. "Mr. Hale hired me because I know how to work. If that bothers people, they're welcome to mind their own business." Porter grinned. "Fair enough. That'll be $4. She paid and carried the supplies out to the wagon. Behind her, the store went back to buzzing with gossip. On the ride back to the ranch, Eli sat beside her. He'd insisted on coming to town, though he hadn't said why. "People talk about us," he said quietly. "Let them. They think Papa's going to lose the ranch." "What do you think?" Eli looked at the reins in his hands. "I think Mama dying broke something in him, and I don't know if it can get fixed. Maybe it can't, but that doesn't mean he's finished." "How do you know?" "Because he got up this morning, and he'll get up tomorrow. As long as he keeps doing that, there's still a chance." But getting up wasn't enough. By the second week, Nola started seeing the real problems. The ranch was dying from the inside out. Feed deliveries were irregular. Fences were falling apart faster than they could be repaired. Half the cattle were underweight, and several had disappeared entirely. The well pump was failing. The roof leaked in 3 places, and money was running out. One night, after the children were asleep, Nola found Garrick in his office staring at a ledger. "How bad is it?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Bad." "Can I see?" He pushed the ledger toward her. She sat down and read through months of entries. Most of it was standard ranch expenses. But some things didn't make sense. "This feed delivery, you were charged for 3 tons, but the receipt says 2 were delivered." "Mistakes happen." "3 times?" Garrick looked up. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying someone's cheating you, and I'm saying you're too tired to notice." He leaned back in his chair. "Even if you're right, what am I supposed to do about it? I need those suppliers. I can't afford to make enemies." "You can't afford to keep losing money either." No. Listen, this ranch is failing, and it's not just because your wife died. Someone's been bleeding you dry, and you've been too buried in grief to see it. His face went hard. "You've been here 2 weeks. Don't pretend you understand how this place works. I understand numbers, and these numbers say you're being robbed. Get out." "Garrick, I said get out." She stood and walked to the door, then stopped. "Your children are watching you give up, and when this place falls apart, they're going to remember that their father had a chance to fight and didn't take it." She left before he could respond. That night, Nola lay in her small room off the kitchen and listened to the house settle around her. Upstairs, Weston cried softly. Clara talked in her sleep. Eli paced his room like a caged animal. And somewhere in the dark, Garrick Hale sat alone with his ledgers and his ghosts. She thought about leaving. She'd done it before, walked away from places that didn't want her help. But something kept her lying there, staring at the ceiling. Maybe it was the children. Maybe it was the ranch itself, stubborn and half dead but still breathing. Or maybe it was the look in Garrick's eyes when he told her to leave. Not anger, but fear. The kind that came from realizing someone had seen straight through you. Near dawn, she heard footsteps on the stairs. Garrick appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked like he hadn't slept. "You're right," he said. "Someone's been stealing from me, and I need help figuring out who." Nola sat up. "Then let's get started." They worked through the records together. Feed deliveries, supply shipments, cattle sales, every transaction over the past 6 months. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Most of the discrepancies traced back to one man, Dale Riggins, Garrick's foreman. He'd been with the ranch for 5 years, trusted, reliable, or so Garrick had thought. "He was at my wife's funeral," Garrick said quietly. "Stood there with his hat in his hands and told me if I needed anything, all I had to do was ask. People lie." "I know, but I didn't think Dale would." "What are you going to do?" Garrick closed the ledger. His face had gone cold, not empty anymore, but something harder. "I'm going to get my money back." "Don't take it." The confrontation happened 3 days later. Garrick called Dale into the barn, away from the other ranch hands. Nola watched from the house, holding Clara's hand while the little girl pressed her face against the window. "What's Papa doing?" Clara whispered. "Fixing something that's broken." Inside the barn, voices rose. Then something crashed. A moment later, Dale stormed out, his face twisted with rage. Garrick followed. His knuckles were bleeding. Dale turned back. "You're making a mistake." "The only mistake I made was trusting you. You think you can run this place without me? You're barely holding on as it is." "Then I'll hold on without you." Dale's expression shifted into something uglier. "You're finished, Hale. Vernon Crow's been waiting for you to fall apart. Now he won't have to wait much longer." He spat in the dust and rode off. Garrick stood in the yard, breathing hard. When he finally turned toward the house, Nola was standing on the porch. "He's right," Garrick said. "I'm barely holding on." "Then hold harder." "I don't know if I can." "Yes, you do. You just forgot." That night, lightning split the sky. Thunder rolled across the valley like artillery fire. Rain hammered the roof. And somewhere out in the darkness, cattle screamed. Garrick was up and running before Nola even made it to the window. Fire. Lightning had struck dry grass near the northern fields, and flames were spreading faster than the rain could drown them. The drought had left everything brittle. One spark, and half the ranch could burn. Nola ran upstairs and shook Eli awake. "Get your brother and sister into the cellar. Don't come out until I say." "What's happening?" "Fire. Go. Now." She ran back downstairs and out into the storm. Rain soaked her instantly. Wind tore at her clothes. Across the fields, orange light bloomed against the night. Ranch hands were already fighting the fire, beating at flames with wet blankets and shovels. But it wasn't enough. The fire was spreading too fast, jumping fences, racing toward the feed storage. Garrick rode past, shouting orders that got lost in the wind. Nola grabbed the nearest ranch hand. "Where's the dynamite?" "What?" "Dynamite. For clearing stumps." "Where is it?" "Tool shed, but—" She was already running. The shed was unlocked. Inside she found 3 sticks of dynamite and a box of fuses. Her hand shook as she lit one. Then she ran toward the feed storage. The fire had already reached the building. Flames climbed the walls. In minutes, it would explode, taking half the ranch with it. Nola threw the dynamite through the open door and ran. The explosion knocked her flat. When she looked up, the feed storage was gone. Just a crater and scattered debris. But the fire had nothing left to feed on. The flames started dying. Rain kept falling. Slowly, the night went quiet again. "Mom." Garrick found her lying in the mud, staring at the sky. "Are you hurt?" "I don't think so." He pulled her to her feet. His face was black with soot. His hands were burned, but his eyes were alive again. "You just saved the ranch." "I just blew up your feed storage. It was already gone." They stood in the rain, looking at the wreckage. Dawn was starting to break. The fire was out. The building still stood. Hollow Creek had survived. "Why did you do that?" Garrick asked. "Because someone had to." "You could have died." "So could you." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something neither of them expected. He laughed. Not a happy sound, but something raw and real and human. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met." "Good. You need stubborn." Quote. The town talked about the fire for weeks. Some said it was an accident. Others whispered that Vernon Crow had paid someone to start it. Nobody could prove anything. But Nola noticed something after that night. Garrick stopped looking through her like she wasn't there. He started asking her opinion on things. Ranch decisions, supply orders, how to handle the children. He started leaving coffee for her in the mornings. Small things. But they mattered. And late at night, when the house was finally quiet, Nola would stand on the porch and look out at the ranch that refused to die. The woman nobody wanted had found a place worth fighting for, and she wasn't leaving. Not for anything. The morning after the fire, Nola woke to find Eli sitting on the porch steps, staring at the blackened fields. She poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down beside him. He didn't acknowledge her at first, just kept looking at the destruction. "Mama used to say fires were nature's way of making room for new things," he said finally. "Your mama sounds like she was smart." "She was. But she also said Papa would be okay after she died. And I don't think she was right about that." Nola sipped her coffee. It was still too hot, but she drank it anyway. "People say things when they're dying that they hope will be true. Doesn't mean they know for certain." "Do you think he'll be okay?" "I think he's trying. That's all anyone can do." Eli picked at a splinter on the step. His fingers were already calloused from work. Too young to have hands like that. "Dale used to say I reminded him of Papa when he was my age, said I had the same stubborn streak. Dale's a thief and a liar. I wouldn't put much stock in his opinions. But what if he was right about Papa being finished? What if we lose everything anyway?" Nola set down her cup and turned to look at the boy. Really, look at him. He was trying so hard to be grown that he'd forgotten how to be 10. "Listen to me. Your father just fired the man who'd been stealing from him for months. He fought a wildfire in the middle of a thunderstorm, and he got up this morning and started figuring out how to rebuild. Does that sound like a man who's finished? No. Then stop waiting for him to fail. He needs you to believe he won't." Eli was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded and stood up. "I should go help with the fences." "You should eat breakfast first." I'm not hungry. Eli. He stopped. Your mama was right about one thing. Your papa will be okay. But not because it's easy, because people like us don't know how to quit even when we probably should. The boy's mouth twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. Then he went inside. Nola stayed on the porch and watched the sun climb higher. Smoke still rose from the fields in thin gray columns. The air smelled like wet ash and burned grass. Across the yard, Garrick was already working, inspecting damage to the barn with two of the remaining ranch hands. She'd seen men like him before. The kind who worked themselves into the ground because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant feeling everything they'd been running from. The difference was whether they had anyone willing to catch them when they finally fell. Nola stood and went back inside. There was bread to bake and children to feed and 100 other things that wouldn't wait for her to finish her coffee. Later that morning, a rider appeared on the horizon. Garrick saw him first and went still. The rider was coming fast, kicking up dust, moving with purpose. Not a casual visit. By the time the horse pulled up to the house, Nola was standing on the porch, with Clara tucked behind her skirts. The little girl had developed a habit of hiding whenever strangers appeared. The rider was young, maybe 20, with a deputy's badge pinned to his vest. He dismounted and pulled off his hat. "Mr. Hale?" Garrick walked over, his face already set in that careful blank expression Nola had learned meant he expected bad news. "That's me. I'm Deputy Carson. Sheriff Tate sent me out to check on the fire. Make sure everyone's all right." "We're fine. Lost some grazing land and a feed storage, but the house and livestock are intact." Carson glanced at the burned fields and nodded. "Glad to hear it. There's been talk in town about how it started. Lightning. That's what most folks think. But Vernon Crow's been telling people he saw riders heading this way last night before the storm hit." Garrick's expression didn't change, but his hands curled into fists. Crow's a liar. Maybe so. But if someone did start that fire deliberately, the sheriff needs to know. Arson's a serious crime. "Tell the sheriff I'll handle my own problems." Carson shifted his weight. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd been told to deliver a message he didn't agree with. "Mr. Hale, with all due respect, you've been having a lot of problems lately. Dale Riggins came into town yesterday saying you assaulted him without cause. Vernon Crow's been filing complaints about your cattle wandering onto his land. And now there's a fire. The sheriff's getting concerned." "Concerned about what?" "About whether you're able to manage your affairs properly." The words hung in the air like poison. Nola stepped forward before Garrick could say something that would make things worse. "Deputy, my name is Nola Vance. I'm the housekeeper here. Mr. Hale discovered Dale Riggins had been embezzling from the ranch. He terminated his employment accordingly. As for the cattle, I'd suggest you ask Mr. Crow why he's cutting Hollow Creek's fence lines in the middle of the night." Carson blinked. "Ma'am, I don't think—" "And regarding the fire, if the sheriff is so concerned, perhaps he should investigate who benefits most from Hollow Creek failing. I imagine that list would be very short and very obvious." The deputy looked between her and Garrick, clearly trying to decide how to respond. Finally, he just put his hat back on. "I'll pass that along to Sheriff Tate. You do that." After Carson rode off, Garrick turned to Nola. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. You would have punched him." "Probably." "And that would have given Crow exactly what he wants. Evidence that you're unstable." Garrick rubbed his face. He looked exhausted. "I'm starting to think he's going to win no matter what I do." "He wins if you give up, so don't." "It's not that simple." "It never is." They stood in the yard, watching dust settle where the deputy had ridden away. Clara peeked out from behind Nola's skirts. "Is Papa in trouble?" she whispered. Nola picked her up. The girl was light as air, all bones and big eyes. "Your Papa's fine, but we need to be smart about how we handle things from now on." "What does that mean?" "It means we stop reacting and start planning." Garrick looked at her. "You have something in mind?" "I might, but first I need to know exactly how much money we have left." That afternoon, they went through the books again. This time, Nola made Garrick explain every expense, every debt, every source of income. The picture that emerged was grim. After paying the remaining ranch hands and covering immediate supplies, they had less than $200. The cattle were worth something, but prices had dropped so low that selling now would be financial suicide. And with the feed storage gone, They didn't have enough to get the herd through winter. We're broke, Garrick said flatly. Even if we make it to spring, we'll have nothing left to rebuild with. Nola tapped her pencil against the ledger. What about the land itself? Is there anything here besides cattle that has value? Like what? I don't know, timber, minerals, water rights? There's no timber worth harvesting, no minerals anyone's found. And water rights aren't worth anything when there's a drought. What about the western section, past the ridge? Garrick frowned. That's rough country. Nothing out there but rocks and scrub. Have you been out there recently? Not in months. Why? Because when I went walking last week, I saw something strange. Wild horses gathering near the canyon. Dozens of them. And they were drinking from somewhere. Garrick sat back. If there's water out there, I don't know about it. Then we should find out. The next morning, they rode out together before dawn. Garrick on his bay gelding, Nola on an old mare named Bess, who'd seen better days but still had heart. They left Eli in charge of his siblings with strict instructions not to open the door for anyone. The ride took 2 hours across country that got rougher the farther west they went. The land rose into rocky hills cut by dry creek beds and stands of juniper. It was beautiful in a harsh way, like everything out here. Beautiful because it refused to die despite every reason to. Near midday, they found the horses. A small herd, maybe 20 head, grazing in a hidden valley Garrick swore he'd never seen before. The mustangs scattered when they approached, but not far. They circled back, watching with wild eyes. How did I not know this was here? Garrick said. Because you've been too busy trying to survive to explore your own land. They dismounted and walked the valley. At the far end, tucked against the base of a cliff, they found it. A spring bubbling up from underground, clear and cold and flowing steady, despite the drought that had dried up half the wells in the territory. Garrick knelt and tasted the water. Then he sat back on his heels and laughed. Actually laughed. This changes everything. How? Water rights are worthless when there's drought. But fresh water during a drought? That's worth more than gold. Every rancher within 50 miles would pay for access to this. Nola crouched beside him. So we sell water rights? Or we use it ourselves. Horses need less water than cattle, and the army's been buying remounts for the western forts. If we could catch and break some of these mustangs, we could sell them for 3 times what cattle are worth right now. Do you know how to break horses? My father did. Taught me when I was a boy. I haven't done it in years, but it's not something you forget. Nola looked at the mustangs, watching them from across the valley. It's risky. Everything's risky right now. It'll take time and money we don't have. So we'll borrow it. From who? The bank won't lend to you. Garrick stood and brushed dirt from his knees. For the first time since she'd arrived, he looked like a man with a plan instead of a man just holding on. Then we'll find another way. We always do. They rode back to the ranch as the sun dropped toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked like fire but weren't. When they arrived, Eli was waiting on the porch. Someone came by while you were gone. Garrick dismounted. Who? Vernon Crow. He said he wanted to talk to you about buying the ranch. I told him you weren't here, and he said he'd come back tomorrow. Nola saw Garrick's jaw tighten. What else did he say? He said the whole territory knows you're finished, and he's willing to pay fair price for the land before the bank takes it from you. Fair price meaning nothing. That's what I figured. Garrick put a hand on his son's shoulder. You did good. Next time he comes, you let me handle it. He makes me nervous, Papa. He makes everyone nervous. That's how men like him operate. That night, after the children were asleep, Garrick found Nola in the kitchen. She was making bread again, working the dough with steady hands while the stove radiated heat into the cool room. Can I ask you something? He said. You just did. He almost smiled. Why are you still here? You could have left after the fire, after Dale, after any of this. But you stayed. Why? Nola kept kneading. The rhythm was soothing. Hands in dough, fold, press, turn, over and over. I stayed because your children needed someone who wouldn't leave, and because this ranch deserves to survive. That's not a real answer. She stopped and looked at him. What do you want me to say? That I have nowhere else to go? That I'm too old and too worn out to start over somewhere new? That I stayed because for the first time in 20 years, I felt like I might actually matter to someone? Garrick didn't respond, just watched her across the kitchen. I stayed because I'm stubborn, Nola said finally. Same as you. Same as this place. We're all too stubborn to die quietly. I'm glad you stayed. Are you? Yes. Even though I'm not young and pretty like you wanted? Especially because you're not. Young and pretty would have run the first time things got hard. You didn't. Nola went back to her bread. Get some sleep, Garrick. Tomorrow we have to figure out how to catch wild horses with no money and no help. We'll manage. We'd better. Vernon Crow arrived the next afternoon in a black carriage pulled by matched grays. He stepped down wearing a suit that probably cost more than Garrick made in a year and smiled like a man who already owned everything he was looking at. Garrick, good to see you. Crow, I hear you had some trouble. Fire, wasn't it? We managed. I'm sure you did. But managing and thriving are two different things. Crow glanced around the yard, taking in the burned fields and damaged outbuildings. This place is falling apart. You know it. I know it. The whole territory knows it. If you came here to gloat, you can leave. I came here to make you an offer, a fair one. $5,000 for the land, livestock, and buildings. That's more than you'll get anywhere else. The land alone is worth 10 times that. Not anymore. Not with the drought. Not with your reputation. Crow's smile widened. People are saying you're unstable, Garrick. Violent. Poor judgment. The bank won't lend to you. Suppliers won't extend credit. You're isolated out here, and everyone knows it. Garrick took a step forward. Nola, watching from the porch, saw his hands curl into fists. Get off my land. I'm trying to help you. By stealing from me? By spreading lies? You started that fire, didn't you? Crow's expression didn't change. Careful with accusations you can't prove. The sheriff's already concerned about your state of mind. Making wild claims won't help your situation. I said get off my land. Think about my offer. You have until the end of the month. After that, I'll be talking to the bank directly. Crow climbed back into his carriage. Oh, and Garrick, that woman you hired? She's making things worse for you. People are talking. A widower and an older spinster alone out here? It doesn't look good. He drove off before Garrick could respond. Nola walked down from the porch. He's baiting you. I know. So don't take the bait. He started that fire. I know he did. Probably, but we can't prove it. So we focus on what we can control. Garrick looked at her. Which is? Catching horses, making money, staying alive long enough to watch Vernon Crow choke on his own greed. Despite everything, Garrick laughed. You're mean when you want to be. I prefer the term pragmatic. Whatever you call it, I like it. They started planning that night. Garrick sketched out the valley where the mustangs gathered, marking water sources and natural choke points. Nola made lists of supplies they'd need: rope, leather, feed, lumber for building corrals. This is going to cost at least $300, she said. Money we don't have. Then we borrow it. From who? Garrick hesitated. There's someone in Redemption who might help, but I'd rather not ask. Why? Because I owe him already, and he's not the forgiving type. Who is he? Name's Marcus Webb. Runs the saloon. Also runs cards, loans money, and owns half the businesses in town. He helped me pay for my wife's medicine when she was sick. I've been paying him back slowly, but I still owe almost $200. Nola set down her pencil. So if we borrow more, we'll owe him $500 total. More or less. And if we can't pay him back, then he owns us. They sat in silence, both of them calculating risks that had no good answers. Finally, Nola spoke. Do you trust him? No, but he's a businessman. If he thinks we can pay him back with interest, he'll lend us the money. Then we make him believe it. The next morning, they rode into Redemption together. Garrick left her at the general store while he went to see Webb. She used the time to buy supplies, chatting with Porter about nothing important while listening to every conversation happening around her. The women at the fabric table were still gossiping. Did you hear about Garrick Hale? Borrowed more money from Marcus Webb. My husband says he's drowning in debt. What's he need money for? Some crazy scheme about catching wild horses, as if that'll save him. He should have just sold to Vernon Crow when he had the chance. At least then his children would have something. Nola kept her face neutral, but her hands tightened on the bag of flowers she was holding. When she paid, Porter gave her an appraising look. You're tougher than you look, Miss Vance. I'd have to be. Most women would have quit by now. I'm not most women? No, I don't suppose you are. She met Garrick outside the saloon. His face was tight, but he nodded. We got the money. What terms? 6 months. 20% interest. If we can't pay, he gets a lien on the ranch. That's robbery. That's business. They rode back to Hollow Creek in silence. The weight of what they'd just done hung between them like smoke. $500 in debt, with 6 months to pay it back. And if they failed, they'd lose everything. That night, Nola couldn't sleep. She kept running numbers in her head, calculating how many horses they'd need to catch and sell just to break even. The math wasn't encouraging. She got up and went to the kitchen, found Garrick already there, sitting at the table with a cup of whiskey. Can't sleep either, she asked. No. She sat down across from him. We're going to make this work. You don't know that. Yes, I do, because failing isn't an option. Garrick drank and set the cup down. What if I'm not strong enough? What if I let everyone down again? You haven't let anyone down. I let my wife down. I couldn't save her. That wasn't your fault. Feels like it was. Nola reached across the table and took the cup from his hands. Listen to me. Your wife died because she got sick. Not because you failed her, and your children are alive and fed and safe because you kept fighting even when it would have been easier to quit. That's not failure. That's the opposite. Then why does it feel so hard? Because you're still breathing, and breathing means feeling everything you tried to bury under work and anger. But you can't bury grief, Garrick. You can only carry it until it gets lighter. He looked at her with those dark eyes that had seen too much. Does it ever get lighter? Eventually, not completely, but enough. They sat together in the quiet kitchen, two people who'd survived enough to know that survival wasn't the same as living. Somewhere upstairs, one of the children cried out in their sleep. Garrick stood to check on them. Before he left, he stopped beside her chair. Thank you. For what? For not leaving. I'm not going anywhere. I know. That's what scares me. Why? Because it means I'm starting to count on you. And everyone I've counted on eventually leaves. Nola looked up at him. I'm not everyone else. No, you're not. He went upstairs and she sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the house settle and the wind move through the empty fields outside. Tomorrow they would start catching horses. Tomorrow they would gamble everything on a plan that might fail. But tonight, she let herself believe they might actually survive. The first attempt to catch the mustangs was a disaster. Garrick spent 3 days building a makeshift corral in the hidden valley using every spare piece of lumber on the ranch. Nola helped him dig post holes in ground so hard it felt like punching through iron. They worked from dawn until dark, sleeping rough under the stars because riding back and forth would waste daylight they couldn't afford to lose. On the third night, Eli showed up on horseback with supplies and a stubborn expression that said he wasn't going back alone. You need help, he said, dismounting. Garrick looked ready to argue, but Nola cut him off. He's right. 3 sets of hands are better than 2. He's 10 years old. I'm almost 11, Eli corrected, and I can ride better than most of the hands you fired. Eli, Papa, I need to do this. I need to be useful. The raw honesty in the boy's voice stopped whatever protest Garrick had been forming. He looked at his son, really looked at him, and Nola could see the moment he recognized something of himself there. The same desperate need to prove worth through work. All right, but you follow orders exactly. No heroics. Yes, sir. They finished the corral the next day. Then came the hard part, actually catching the horses. Garrick's plan was simple in theory. Drive the mustangs toward the corral using noise and movement, funnel them through the narrow canyon approach, then close the gate before they could scatter. Simple in theory, impossible in practice. The first run, the horses sensed them coming and bolted in 3 different directions. The second run, they got 6 horses near the corral before the lead mare wheeled around and took the entire herd straight through a gap Garrick had sworn was too narrow for them to pass. The third run, Eli's horse stepped in a prairie dog hole and threw him hard enough that he couldn't breathe for 30 seconds. Garrick called it off after that. They rode back to the ranch in defeated silence. 3 days of work. 3 failed attempts, and they were no closer to catching a single horse. That night, while Garrick tended to Eli's bruised ribs, Nola sat on the porch and tried to figure out what they were doing wrong. The mustangs were smart. Too smart to be driven like cattle. They'd been surviving out here for generations, and they knew every escape route, every bolt hole, every trick. You couldn't force wild things. You had to make them want to come to you. The next morning, Nola rode out alone. She took bread, jerked beef, and a canteen, found a spot upwind of where the mustangs usually watered, and sat down to wait. Didn't move. Didn't make noise. Just sat. The horses appeared near midday. They approached the spring cautiously, testing the air. The led mare saw Nola immediately and froze. Nola didn't react, just sat there like a stone, breathing slow and steady. 20 minutes passed. Then the mare decided Nola wasn't a threat and led the herd to water. Nola came back every day for a week. Same spot, same time. Let the horses get used to her presence. By the 4th day, they barely reacted when she arrived. By the 7th, the lead mare drank from the spring while Nola sat less than 30 feet away. Garrick thought she was wasting time. We can't just sit around hoping they'll walk into the corral on their own. I'm not hoping. I'm planning. Planning what? Trust me. On the 8th day, Nola brought grain, scattered it near the spring, and retreated to her usual spot. The horses were suspicious at first, but hunger won out. They ate. On the 10th day, she scattered grain closer to herself, then closer, then close enough that she could hear them breathing as they fed. On the 14th day, the lead mare ate grain from Nola's outstretched hand. When she rode back to the ranch that evening, Garrick was waiting in the yard with his arms crossed. "Where have you been?" "Making friends." "With who?" "The horses." She told him her plan. They'd use grain to lead the mustangs into the corral gradually, over days instead of hours. Make it feel like their choice instead of a trap. It would take longer, but it would work. Garrick was skeptical. And if it doesn't? Then we're no worse off than we are now. We're running out of time. Webb wants his money in 5 months. Then we'd better get started. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of patient, exhausting work, laying grain trails, moving the corral fence gradually closer, sitting for hours in the heat while the horses decided whether to trust them. Nola's skin burned dark brown. Garrick's hands cracked and bled from rope work. Eli learned to move so quietly that even the skittish colts didn't spook when he approached. And slowly, impossibly, it worked. The horses started following the grain trails on their own, started lingering near the corral, started treating the humans as part of the landscape instead of threats. On the 21st day, 12 mustangs walked into the corral and stayed there even after Garrick closed the gate. They'd done it. Nola stood beside the fence, watching the horses mill around inside, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not the kind that came from surviving, the kind that came from actually succeeding. Garrick walked up beside her. His face was streaked with dust and sweat, and he was grinning like a fool. "I can't believe that worked. Told you it would. You're insufferable when you're right. Then you must think I'm insufferable all the time." He laughed, and the sound carried across the valley. For a moment, they just stood there, two people who'd gambled everything on an insane plan and somehow pulled it off. Then reality set back in. "Now comes the hard part," Garrick said. "What's harder than catching wild horses?" Breaking them. Breaking horses was brutal, dangerous work that required patience neither of them had in abundance. The mustangs weren't like ranch horses born to domestication. They were wild, strong, and absolutely convinced that humans were predators trying to kill them. The first horse Garrick tried to saddle broke his nose with a headbutt that sent him sprawling in the dirt. The second one kicked a fence post clean in half. The third one was calm right up until Garrick swung into the saddle. Then it exploded into a frenzy of bucking that threw him 6 feet and nearly trampled Eli when he tried to help. Nola watched from outside the corral, wincing every time Garrick hit the ground. "You're going to kill yourself," she called. "Probably." He stood up, spat blood, and grabbed the next horse. It went on like that for days. Garrick would get thrown, dust himself off, and try again. His body accumulated bruises and layers. His ribs hurt so bad he could barely breathe some mornings. But he kept going because stopping meant admitting defeat, and defeat meant losing everything. On the 5th day, he finally stayed on a horse long enough to walk it around the corral twice before it threw him into the fence. On the 8th day, he rode one for almost 10 minutes. On the 12th day, he broke his first Mustang completely. A young gelding with a white blaze and a temperament just calm enough to be trainable. Garrick rode him out of the corral and down to the creek, and the horse responded to commands like it had been doing it all its life. That night, they celebrated with whiskey and the last of the good coffee. "How many do we need to sell to cover the debt?" Eli asked. Garrick did the math in his head. 8, maybe 10 if the prices stay low. "And how many do we have broke?" 1. The boy's face fell. "So we're still in trouble." "We're always in trouble. The question is whether we're in slightly less trouble than yesterday." Nola poured herself more coffee. "How long to break the rest?" "If I don't die first, another month at least." "That puts us close to Webb's deadline." "I know." They fell silent, each of them calculating risks and odds that didn't add up to anything good. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Not close enough to bring rain, just close enough to remind them that weather could still destroy everything they'd built. The next morning, trouble arrived in a different form. Nola was in the kitchen when she heard horses in the yard. Multiple horses. She looked out the window and saw 4 men dismounting, all of them armed. Vernon Crow stood among them, looking pleased with himself. She went to find Garrick. He was in the barn, working with one of the mustangs. When she told him about the visitors, his expression went dark. "Stay inside with the children. Like hell." "Nola, if Crow brought guns, you're not facing him alone." They walked out together. Crow saw them coming and smiled that same predatory smile he always wore. "Garrick, Miss Vance. Beautiful morning, isn't it?" "What do you want, Crow?" "I heard you've been catching mustangs out in the western section. Impressive work." "So? So I'm wondering if you have the proper permits." Garrick went very still. "What permits?" "Federal permits. Required for capturing wild horses on territorial land. Failure to obtain proper documentation is a crime, punishable by fines and seizure of assets. That's my land, has been for 20 years. Actually, the western section borders federal territory. And according to my surveyor, your corral sits about 50 feet across the boundary line." Crow pulled out a folded map and held it up. "Which means those horses you've been catching. They're on government property, without permits." Nola felt her stomach drop. "You're lying. I have documentation, signed by a federal land agent in Tucson. The boundary was redrawn last year when they were planning the rail expansion. Nobody bothered to tell you because, well, you've had other problems." Garrick's hands were shaking, not from fear, from rage barely held in check. "You had the boundary changed." "I had nothing to do with it, but I did pay attention when it happened, unlike some people." "What do you want?" Crow's smile widened. "The same thing I've always wanted, your land. Sell to me now, and I'll make sure the federal agent overlooks this little permit issue. Refuse, and I'll have the marshal out here by tomorrow to confiscate those horses and possibly arrest you for theft of government property." "You son of a—" Nola grabbed Garrick's arm before he could take a swing. "Don't. He's stealing from us." "I know, but hitting him won't help." Crow adjusted his hat. "You have until tomorrow to decide. Sell or lose everything anyway." He climbed back on his horse. "Oh, and Miss Vance? You should think about finding new employment. When this place goes under, you'll be out of work. And at your age, that's not an easy situation." They rode off, leaving Garrick and Nola standing in the yard with the wreckage of everything they'd been building. Garrick turned and punched the fence post hard enough to split his knuckles open. Then he did it again, and again, until Nola caught his arm and held it. "Stop. I can't do this anymore. Every time we get ahead, something else comes along to destroy it. So we fight back." "How? He owns the land office, he owns the federal agents, he probably owns the damn marshal too. We can't win." "Then we don't fight fair." Garrick looked at her, blood dripped from his hand. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about beating him at his own game. He wants you to react, to fight, to give him ammunition. So we don't. We do something he won't expect." "Like what?" Nola was already thinking, her mind racing through possibilities. "That map he showed us. Did you see the signature?" "No." "Neither did I. Which means it might be forged, or dated wrong, or signed by someone without authority. How does that help us?" "Because if we can prove his documentation is false, we can get him charged with fraud, and fraud means federal prison." Garrick shook his head. "We'd need a lawyer, and proof, and time. We don't have any of those things." "No, but we have something better." What? We have Eli. The boy had been listening from the barn. He stepped out now, looking confused. What do I have to do with this? Nola smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who'd survived by learning when to fight dirty. How fast can you ride to redemption? What Nola had in mind was simple, illegal, and completely insane. Eli would ride to town and find the federal land office. While the clerk was at lunch, he'd sneak in and copy the real boundary maps. If the maps showed something different than what Crow claimed, they'd have proof he was lying. Garrick hated the plan immediately. Absolutely not. I'm not sending my son to commit a crime. It's not a crime if the documents are public record. Breaking into a government office is definitely a crime. Then I'll go. You can't ride fast enough, and you don't know the town layout. Nola turned to Eli. What do you think? The boy looked between his father and Nola, then straightened his shoulders. I can do it. No, Garrick said flatly. Papa, we're out of options. We'll find another way. There is no other way. You know that. The truth of it hung between them. Garrick looked at his son and saw everything he'd been trying to protect, but he also saw determination, the same stubborn refusal to quit that had kept Hollow Creek alive this long. Finally, he nodded. You get caught, you run. You don't fight, you don't argue. You just run and come straight home. Understand? Yes, sir. They planned it for 2 days, mapped out the route, timed the clerk's lunch schedule, made sure Eli knew exactly where the land records were kept and how to copy them without getting caught. The night before he left, Nola found him on the porch, staring at the stars. Scared? She asked. A little. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. What if I can't do it? Then we'll figure something else out. But I think you can. Eli looked at her. Why? Because you're your father's son, and he's the stubbornest man I've ever met, which means you're probably stubborn enough to pull this off. The boy smiled slightly. Then his expression turned serious. Miss Vance? Are you going to stay after all this is over? Why wouldn't I? Because everyone leaves eventually. Mama left, Dale left. Even the ranch hands keep leaving. Nola sat down beside him. Your mama didn't leave, she died. That's different, and Dale was a thief. The ranch hands were cowards. I'm neither of those things. Then what are you? I'm someone who's finally found a place worth fighting for, and I don't give up easy. Promise? She held out her hand. Promise. They shook on it, and Eli seemed satisfied. The next morning, he left before dawn. Garrick watched him ride away with an expression that said every instinct was screaming at him to call the boy back, but he didn't. He'll be fine, Nola said. You don't know that. No, but I believe it. The day dragged. Garrick tried to work but couldn't focus. He'd start breaking a horse, then stop and stare at the horizon. Nola made bread she didn't need and cleaned rooms that were already clean. Clara sensed the tension and clung to her skirts, asking questions neither of them could answer. By evening, they were both standing on the porch, watching the road. He should be back by now, Garrick said. He's fine. You don't know that. Stop saying that. What if he got caught? What if they arrested him? What if... Stop. But she was worried too, more worried than she'd admit. The boy was smart, but smart didn't mean invincible. And if Vernon Crow had people watching the land office, Eli could be in real danger. Just before full dark, they saw a rider coming. Garrick was off the porch before Nola could stop him, running toward the approaching horse. It was Eli, alive, unhurt, and carrying a leather satchel. Did you get it? Garrick asked, pulling him down from the saddle. I got it. They went inside and spread the maps on the kitchen table. Official federal boundary maps, dated and signed. And according to these maps, the western section of Hollow Creek was well within Garrick's legal property. The boundary Crow had claimed didn't exist. He lied, Garrick said. The bastard completely lied. Now we prove it, Nola said. But proving it meant confronting Crow publicly, and that meant risk. The next day, Garrick rode to Redemption and went straight to the marshal's office. Marshal Pike was a thick man with a gray mustache and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much stupidity to be impressed by more. I need to report a fraud, Garrick said. Pike leaned back in his chair. What kind of fraud? Vernon Crow has been using forged federal documents to claim my land is outside my legal boundaries. You have proof? Garrick laid out the maps. showed him the discrepancies, explained how Crow had been systematically trying to steal Hollow Creek using false permits and manufactured legal problems. Pike studied the documents for a long time. Then he looked up. This is serious. If what you're saying is true, Crow could face federal charges. It's true. Then I'll need to investigate. Bring Crow in for questioning. See his documentation. When? Give me 2 days. Garrick wanted it to happen faster, but he nodded. 2 days. They could survive 2 more days. What he didn't know was that Crow had already heard about the visit to the marshal's office, and desperate men with money were dangerous in ways that honest men couldn't predict. That night, riders came to Hollow Creek. Not just a few. A dozen. Maybe more. They came in the dark during a storm, when thunder covered the sound of their approach. By the time Garrick realized what was happening, they were already cutting the corral fences and scattering the horses. He ran outside into rain and chaos. Gunfire cracked across the valley. Someone was shooting at the house. Windows shattered, wood splintered. Inside, Nola shoved the children toward the cellar. Get down there and don't come up until I say. What about you? Clara cried. I'll be fine. Go. She grabbed the shotgun Garrick kept by the door. She'd never fired one in her life, but she'd seen it done. Load, aim. Don't think about it. Outside, Garrick was fighting 3 men near the barn. He'd already put one down, but the others were armed, and he wasn't. Nola stepped onto the porch and fired the shotgun in their general direction. The blast nearly knocked her over, missed everything it was aimed at. But the noise made the men scatter. Garrick looked up and saw her. Get back inside. Not a chance. More riders appeared. The Mustangs were scattering in every direction, weeks of work disappearing into the storm. Garrick tried to reach them, but someone tackled him from behind. They went down in the mud, fists flying. Nola fired again. This time she actually hit something. A man yelped and fell from his horse. She reloaded with shaking hands. Then she saw Vernon Crow. He was standing near the tree line, watching the chaos with satisfaction. Not participating, just watching his hired thugs destroy everything. Nola pointed the shotgun at him. Call them off! Crow saw her and smiled. Or what? You'll shoot me? I don't think so. Try me. Miss Vance, you're out of your depth. Put the gun down before someone gets hurt. Someone's already hurt, and it's about to be you. She fired. Not at him. At the ground near his horse. The animal bolted, throwing Crow hard. He hit the dirt and rolled, cursing. The other riders saw their boss go down and hesitated. That moment of hesitation was all Garrick needed. He grabbed a dropped rifle and fired into the air. Next one's not a warning. The men looked at each other. Then slowly, they started backing off. This wasn't worth dying for. Within minutes, they were gone. Disappeared into the storm like they'd never been there. Garrick and Nola stood in the yard, soaked and shaking, surrounded by broken fences and scattered debris. Are you hurt? He asked. No? You? I'll live. They checked on the children, found them huddled in the cellar, frightened but safe. Clara was crying. Weston was howling. Eli was holding them both, trying to be brave. It's over, Garrick said. You can come out. But it wasn't over, not really. By morning, they'd counted the damage. 6 horses lost, 3 fences destroyed. The barn door was hanging by one hinge, and Crow was still out there, probably planning his next move. Garrick sat on the porch steps and put his head in his hands. We can't keep doing this. Nola sat beside him. I know. Every time we get close, he destroys it. So we hit him first. Garrick looked at her. How? By doing what we should have done from the beginning. We take everything we have to the federal authorities, the maps, the forged permits, witness testimony about last night's attack. We bury him so deep he never gets out. And if that doesn't work? Nola didn't have an answer for that, but she knew one thing. Vernon Crow had made a mistake last night. He'd brought the fight to them, made it personal. And personal fights meant no more rules. Marshal Pike arrived at Hollow Creek 3 days after the attack, and the look on his face said he already knew more than Garrick had told him. He dismounted slowly, surveying the damage with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen plenty of violence but still found it distasteful. The broken fences. The bullet holes in the house. The scorch marks where someone had tried to set the barn on fire before the rain put it out. Hell of a mess, Pike said. Garrick stood on the porch, arms crossed. That's one way to put it. You want to tell me what happened? Vernon Crow sent men to destroy my operation. They scattered my horses, shot up the house, and tried to kill me in front of my children. You have proof it was Crow? I saw him. So did Miss Vance. Pike turned to Nola, who was standing in the doorway. That true? Every word. And you'd testify to that? Gladly. Pike scratched his jaw. Problem is, Crow's already filed a complaint against you both. Says you assaulted him on his own property. Says you fired on him without provocation. Garrick's face went dark. That's a lie. Maybe so, but it's your word against his, and he's got 6 witnesses who'll swear he was nowhere near your ranch that night. Of course he does. He bought them. Probably, but I can't arrest a man based on probably. Pike pulled out a folded paper. This is a summons. Court hearing next week. Judge Patterson wants to hear both sides before he decides whether to press charges. Charges against who? Against whoever the evidence points to. Could be Crow, could be you, could be both. Nola stepped forward. Marshal, we have documentation proving Vernon Crow has been using forged federal permits to steal this land. We have maps showing the boundary claims he made are false. How much more evidence do you need? I need evidence that'll hold up in court. Those maps? Crow's lawyer says they're outdated, says new surveys were done last year, and you're the ones using false information. That's ridiculous. I'm just telling you what I'm dealing with. This isn't as simple as you want it to be. Garrick felt rage building in his chest, the kind that made his hands shake and his vision narrow. So what are you saying, that he gets away with it? I'm saying you need a better lawyer than you've got, and you need to stop doing things that give him ammunition. Pike looked pointedly at the shotgun leaning against the doorframe. Firing on a man, even if he deserves it, makes you look guilty. He brought gunmen to my home. Then you should have stayed inside and reported it instead of shooting first. They would have burned us out. Maybe. But now we'll never know. Pike climbed back on his horse. Get yourself representation. Show up at the hearing, and for the love of everything, stop making this worse. After the marshal left, Garrick punched the porch post hard enough to split the wood. Nola grabbed his wrist before he could do it again. Stop breaking your hand, we need it. This is insane. He attacks us, and we're the ones getting summoned to court. Because he's smarter than we've been giving him credit for. He knows the law, knows how to work it. So what do? We find someone who knows it better. The problem was finding a lawyer willing to take their case. Garrick had already asked 3 in redemption, and all of them had turned him down. Too risky. Too much bad blood with Crow. Not enough money to make it worth their time. That's when Eli mentioned something he'd overheard in town. There's a lawyer from Tucson who's been staying at the hotel. Someone said he's investigating land fraud cases. Garrick looked up from the fence he was repairing. What's his name? Didn't catch it, but Porter said he's been asking questions about Crow. Nola and Garrick exchanged glances. A lawyer already looking into Crow was either a gift or a trap, but they were running out of options. They rode to Redemption that afternoon and found the lawyer eating dinner in the hotel restaurant. He was younger than Garrick expected, maybe 30, with wire-rimmed glasses and ink stains on his fingers. He looked up when they approached, and his expression shifted from annoyance to interest. Mr. Hale, I presume? How'd you know? I've been asking about you. Heard you're having trouble with Vernon Crow. He gestured to the empty chairs. Sit. I'm Nathan Reeves, and before you ask, yes, I can help you. The question is whether you can afford me. Probably not, Garrick said, but I need to hear what you've got to say anyway. Reeves wiped his mouth and pushed his plate aside. I've been building a case against Crow for 6 months. Land fraud, document forgery, bribery. He's been systematically stealing property across 3 territories, and nobody's been able to stop him because he's very, very good at covering his tracks. So what changed? Someone in the federal land office got a conscience. Sent me copies of real boundary maps along with Crow's forged versions. The evidence is solid, but I need witnesses. People who've been directly harmed by his schemes and are willing to testify. Nola leaned forward. We'll testify. We've got documentation, maps, and first-hand knowledge of his tactics. Good. But testimony alone won't be enough. I need a smoking gun. Something that ties him directly to criminal activity in a way he can't deny. Like what? Like proof he ordered the attack on your ranch, or evidence he's been bribing federal officials, or documents showing he knew the permits he was using were fake. Garrick shook his head. We don't have any of that. Then we need to get it. How? Reeves smiled, and it wasn't a particularly reassuring expression. By making him think he's already won. The plan Reeves laid out was risky and required perfect timing. They would let Crow believe he'd broken them, that Garrick was ready to sell, that Hollow Creek was finished. And when Crow came to collect his victory, they'd have witnesses ready to document everything he said and did. You want me to pretend to surrender, Garrick said flatly. I want you to bait a trap. Crow's arrogant. He'll brag. And when he does, we'll have him. And if he doesn't, then we go to court with what we have and hope it's enough. Nola could see Garrick struggling with it. His pride wanted to fight openly, honestly, but pride had already cost them too much. We do it, she said. Garrick looked at her. You sure? No, but I'm tired of losing. That night, Garrick sent word to Crow through a neutral party. He was ready to talk about selling. Crow responded within hours, suggesting they meet at the ranch the following evening. He's eager, Nola observed. Of course he is. He thinks he's won. They spent the next day preparing. Reeves brought a stenographer who would hide in the barn during the meeting, taking down every word. Marshal Pike agreed to wait just out of sight in case things went wrong. And Garrick rehearsed what he'd say, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. When Crow arrived that evening, he came alone, confident, smiling. Garrick, I'm glad you came to your senses. I didn't have much choice. No, you didn't. Crow walked through the yard, looking around like he already owned the place. I'll give you $4,000 for everything. Land, buildings, livestock. That's generous considering the condition. $4,000? The land alone is worth $15,000. Was worth $15,000 before you ran it into the ground, before the attacks, before your reputation got so damaged that nobody wants to do business with you. Crow's smile widened. $4,000. Take it or leave it. Garrick's hands curled into fists. Nola touched his arm gently, reminding him to stay calm. Why do you want this place so bad? Garrick asked. There are plenty of ranches you could buy, because this one sits on a freshwater spring that'll be worth a fortune once the drought gets worse. And because the railroad's coming through here in 2 years, this land will be worth 10 times what I'm paying you. Crow pulled out a folded contract. I'm not even pretending to hide it anymore. You lost. I won. That's how the world works. And the attack? The men you sent? What attack? I was nowhere near here that night, and even if I was, you can't prove anything. Can't I? Something in Garrick's tone made Crow pause. What are you talking about? The barn door opened, and Reeves stepped out with the stenographer and Marshal Pike. Crow's face went white, then red. This is entrapment. This is justice, Reeves said. You just confessed to conspiracy, fraud, and criminal intent in front of witnesses. That's enough to put you away for 10 years. You can't use this. I'll get it thrown out. Try. But right now, I've got you on record admitting to land fraud with intent to profit from illegal activity. The federal prosecutor is going to love this. Pike stepped forward with handcuffs. Vernon Crow, you're under arrest. This is a mistake. I have lawyers. I have friends in high places. Good for you. You'll need them. Crow looked at Garrick with pure hatred. This isn't over. Yes, Garrick said quietly. It is. They took Crow away in shackles, still protesting, still threatening. And when the dust settled, Garrick stood in the yard with Nola beside him, watching the sun set over land that was finally truly his. We did it, Nola said. We did. I can't believe it actually worked. Neither can I. They stood in silence, letting the reality sink in. Then Garrick turned to her. Thank you. For what? For not leaving. For fighting when I wanted to quit. For being stubborn enough to believe we could win. Nola looked at him, really looked, and saw something different in his face. Not the empty grief she'd seen when she first arrived. Not the exhausted desperation that had followed. Something newer. Something almost like hope. We should celebrate, she said. How? I don't know. I've never won anything before. Garrick laughed, and the sound was genuine. Neither have I. But the celebration was short-lived. 3 days later, Marcus Webb showed up at the ranch. He arrived at dawn in a black carriage, dressed like a man going to a funeral. When Garrick saw him, his stomach dropped. Mr. Webb, didn't expect to see you out here. Webb stepped down from the carriage, his face expressionless. I heard about what happened with Crow. Congratulations. Thank you. Now let's talk about what you owe me. They went inside. Nola made coffee, nobody drank, while Webb laid out papers on the kitchen table. You borrowed $500 3 weeks ago. Terms were 6 months, 20% interest. But there was also a clause that if you defaulted on any payment, the entire amount became due immediately. Garrick's face went pale. I haven't defaulted. No, but you also haven't made a payment. First one was due yesterday. I didn't know that. It's in the contract, which you signed. Nola looked at the papers. There it was, buried in the fine print. First payment due 30 days after the loan. $50 plus interest. We don't have $50, Garrick said. Then you're in default, which means I can demand full repayment right now. $500 plus 60 days of interest. That's $547. We can't pay that. I know, which is why I'm here to discuss alternatives. The word alternatives hung in the air like a noose. Webb pulled out another document. You can sign over a portion of your land as collateral. If you pay the full amount within 90 days, you get the land back. If not, it becomes mine. How much land? The western section, including the spring. Nola felt sick. The spring was the only thing keeping them alive. Without it, the ranch would die. That's not an alternative, she said. That's robbery. Webb looked at her with cold eyes. That's business. Mr. Hale borrowed money he couldn't repay. Now he pays the consequences. Give us time, Garrick said. We have horses. We can sell them, make the payments. How many horses do you have left after Crow's attack? 6. Maybe 7 if we can catch the ones that scattered. And what are they worth? $70, $80 each if they're properly broke. So maybe $500 if you're lucky, which leaves you nothing to live on and no way to pay future installments. Webb tapped the contract. Sign over the land. It's the only way. Garrick looked at Nola. She could see the defeat creeping back into his eyes. Don't, she said. We don't have a choice. There's always a choice. Not this time. He signed the paper. Wasn't. Webb took it, folded it carefully, and stood. You have 90 days. After that, the western section becomes mine, whether you pay or not. The contract is written that way for a reason. After he left, Garrick sat at the table with his head in his hands. I'm sorry. Nola didn't respond. She was too angry to trust her voice. I didn't know about the payment, Garrick continued. I should have read the contract more carefully. Yes, you should have. I thought we had more time. So did I. What do we do now? Nola looked at the numbers. They needed to make $547 in 90 days, with 6 half-broke horses and a ranch that was barely functional. We sell everything that isn't nailed down. Horses, cattle, equipment, everything. That won't be enough. Then we find another way. There is no other way. Nola slammed her hand on the table. Stop saying that. Every time we hit a wall, you give up. I'm tired of it. I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic. No, you're being a coward. The word hit him like a slap. He stood up, face flushed with anger. What did you just say? You heard me. You're giving up because it's easier than fighting. You did it when your wife died. You did it when Dale stole from you, and you're doing it now. Get out. No. I said get out. Make me. They stood facing each other across the kitchen, both of them breathing hard. Then something in Garrick broke. Not anger. Something deeper. I don't know how to keep fighting, he said quietly. I'm tired. I'm so tired. And I don't know how to keep doing this. Nola's anger drained away. She walked around the table and stood in front of him. Then let me fight for a while. You don't have to carry everything alone. I don't want you to carry it either. Too bad. You don't get to decide that. He looked at her, and something passed between them. Something unspoken, but understood. They'd been through too much together to pretend it was just about the ranch anymore. Why do you care so much? He asked. Because you're not the only one who found something worth fighting for. Nola. She kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't romantic. Just two people who'd survived hell together finally admitting what had been building between them for months. When she pulled back, Garrick looked stunned. We can't, he said. Why not? Because people will talk. Because you work for me. Because it's too soon after... After what? After your wife died? Garrick, she's been gone almost a year, and I don't care what people say. Do you? No, but then stop making excuses. He kissed her back, harder this time, and for a moment the weight of everything else disappeared. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. We still have to figure out how to save the ranch, Nola said. I know. And we have 90 days to do it. I know. So we should probably get started. Garrick smiled. Actually smiled. Probably. They sold the first horse 2 days later, a young mare that had taken to the saddle better than the others. Got $85 for her from a cavalry buyer passing through. The second horse went for $70, the third for $65 because it had a slight limp. By the end of the first month, they'd sold 4 horses and raised $300. Not enough. Not even close. Garrick pushed himself harder, breaking the remaining horses faster than was safe. He got thrown twice. The second time, he hit his head hard enough to see stars and couldn't stand up for 5 minutes. Nola found him sitting in the dirt, blood running down his face from a gash above his eyebrow. You're going to kill yourself. I'm fine. You're bleeding. I've bled before. She cleaned the wound in the kitchen, her hands gentler than her words. This has to stop. We need the money. Not if you're dead. Then what do you suggest? She'd been thinking about it for days, turning it over in her mind, looking for angles they'd missed, and she kept coming back to one thing. The spring. What about it? People are desperate for water. We could sell access, charge neighboring ranches to water their stock. That's what Webb wants. He's waiting for us to fail so he can take it. So we don't fail. We charge enough to make the payments and keep the land. Garrick shook his head. Nobody's going to pay. They'll just find water elsewhere. There is no water elsewhere. The drought's getting worse. Half the wells in the territory have dried up. We're the only reliable source for 50 miles. And you think people will pay for that? I think desperate people will pay anything. She was right. Within a week, they had 3 ranchers willing to pay for water access. $20 per month per herd. It wasn't much, but it was steady. Then someone mentioned it to a freight company that needed water for their mule teams. They paid $50 for a 3-month contract. Then a small settlement 30 miles south sent a representative asking about buying water barrels. They paid in advance. By the end of the second month, they'd raised another $200. Still not enough. They needed $90 more and time was running out. That's when disaster struck again. Garrick was riding the fence line near the western section when his horse stumbled. A prairie dog hole, or maybe just bad luck. The horse went down hard and Garrick went with it. He felt something snap in his leg, heard it snap. Then pain exploded through him so bright he couldn't breathe. The ranch hand who found him said later that Garrick's leg was bent at an angle that made him want to vomit. Compound fracture, bones sticking through skin. They got him back to the house and sent for the doctor. But the doctor was 2 days' ride away dealing with an outbreak of fever in the next county. Nola set the bone herself. She'd never done it before, but she'd seen it done. And Garrick couldn't wait 2 days for proper medical help. She gave him whiskey until he was half drunk, then enlisted Eli to hold him down while she straightened the leg and splinted it. Garrick screamed, passed out halfway through, came back to consciousness, cursing. When it was done, Nola wrapped the leg tight and prayed she'd done it right. The doctor arrived 3 days later and said she'd saved Garrick's life. The bone was set properly. No infection. He'd heal, but it would take months. Months they didn't have. With Garrick bedridden, the work fell to Nola and Eli. They managed the water contracts, tended the remaining horses, kept the ranch running. But they were exhausted, stretched too thin, and they were still $20 short with 2 weeks left on Webb's deadline. Nola sat on the porch one night, staring at the books and trying to find money that didn't exist. Behind her, she heard Garrick moving around on his crutches. You should be in bed. I've been in bed for 3 weeks. I'm going insane. She didn't argue, just made room for him to sit. We're not going to make it, are we? He said. I don't know. I'm sorry. This is my fault. It's not anyone's fault. It's just bad luck. Feels like more than luck. They sat together in the dark, listening to the wind move through the empty fields. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, lonely and wild. Nola? Yeah? If we lose this place, what will you do? She'd been trying not to think about it, but the question hung there anyway. I don't know. Find work somewhere else, I guess. You could do better than here. I don't want better. I want this. Why? She looked at him. Because for the first time in my life, I'm not just surviving. I'm building something. With you, with the kids, and I'm not ready to give that up. Garrick reached for her hand in the dark. Neither am I. They stayed like that until the stars came out. Two people holding on to something that was slipping away despite everything they'd done to save it. The answer came from the last place Nola expected. Clara found her in the kitchen 3 days before Webb's deadline, holding something wrapped in cloth. The little girl had been quieter than usual lately, watching the adults with eyes that understood more than a 6-year-old should. Miss Nola, I have something for you. Nola dried her hands on her apron. What is it, sweetheart? Clara unwrapped the cloth carefully, revealing a small wooden box. Inside were coins, silver dollars mostly, along with some smaller change, maybe $30 in total. Where did you get this? It was Mama's. She kept it hidden under the floorboard in her room. For emergencies, she said. Clara's voice got smaller. Papa doesn't know about it. She told me not to tell him unless we really needed it. Nola knelt down to the girl's level. Clara, this is your mama's money. You should keep it. But we need it now, don't we? To keep the ranch? Yes, but then Mama would want us to use it. She always said family takes care of family. Tears were running down Clara's face now. I don't want to leave. This is my home. Nola pulled the girl into a hug, feeling her own throat tighten. I know, baby, I know. When Clara finally pulled away, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Will it be enough? I don't know yet, but it helps. It helps a lot. Mama used to say that even small things matter when you're building something big. Is that true? Nola looked at the coins, then at the child who'd carried the weight of this secret for however long. Your mama was a smart woman, and yes, it's true. Every bit matters. She took the money to Garrick that night. He was sitting up in bed, trying to read by lamplight, his broken leg propped on pillows. The frustration of being bedridden had been eating at him for weeks, making him short-tempered and difficult. When she showed him the box, his face went pale. Where did you get this? Clara. Your wife hid it. She wanted Clara to know about it in case something happened. Garrick took the box with shaking hands, opened it, stared at the contents like they might disappear if he looked away. Sarah saved this? Apparently. She never told me. Maybe she knew you'd spend it on her medicine, or the ranch. Maybe she wanted to make sure there was something left for the children no matter what happened. Garrick's hands were trembling now. He picked up one of the coins, turning it over and over. The last few months before she died, she kept asking me about the children, whether they'd be taken care of, whether they'd have enough. I kept telling her not to worry, that I'd handle everything. His voice cracked. But she knew I might not be able to. She was protecting them the only way she could. Even dying, she was still thinking ahead, still planning. He looked up at Nola, his eyes wet, and I couldn't even see past the next day. Nola sat on the edge of the bed. You were drowning. People who are drowning can't think about next week. They can barely think about the next breath. But she was dying, and she still managed to... Shh! Stop. You can't compare yourself to someone who had time to prepare. Sarah knew what was coming. She had months to make arrangements. You didn't get that luxury. You got thrown into deep water with 3 children and a failing ranch and no idea how to swim. Garrick set the box down and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. I miss her. I know I have you now, and I'm grateful, but I still miss her. Of course you do. That doesn't change just because you're moving forward. Does it make me a bad person? To be glad you're here while still wishing she was? It makes you human. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Garrick counted the money slowly. $28.40. Combined with what they'd already raised, it brought them to within $10 of what they needed. So close, but not close enough. Nola did the math in her head again, checked the ledgers, looked for anything they could sell, any corner they could cut. There was nothing left. They'd already sold every piece of equipment they could spare, every animal that wasn't essential, every scrap of anything that had value. "We're still short," she said. Garrick nodded. "I know. So what do we do?" "I don't know." The weight of those 3 words pressed down on both of them. After everything they'd survived, everything they'd sacrificed, they were going to fall short by $10. $10 might as well have been 10,000. "There's one more thing we could try," Garrick said finally. "What?" "The townspeople. Some of them have benefited from the water access, the freight company, the settlement to the south. Maybe they'd be willing to contribute." "You want to ask for charity?" "I want to ask for help." "There's a difference." Nola wasn't convinced. She'd spent her whole life watching people turn away from those who needed help. Charity was something people gave when it made them feel good, not when it actually cost them anything. But they were out of options. "All right," she said. "I'll go tomorrow." "I should be the one asking." "You can barely walk, and besides, I'm better at this than you are." "Better at begging?" "Better at asking without making it sound like the world owes us something." Despite everything, Garrick almost smiled. Fair point. The next morning, Nola rode into Redemption with Eli. The boy had insisted on coming, saying he was old enough to help and tired of being left behind. Nola didn't have the heart to refuse him. The town looked the same as always. Dusty Main Street, buildings that leaned slightly in the wind, people going about their business with the weary determination of folks who'd learned not to expect much from life. Nola started with Porter at the general store. She explained the situation plainly, without embellishment. Hollow Creek was $10 short of saving the western section. If they lost the spring, the water contracts would be worthless, and everyone who'd been depending on that water would be back to hauling it from 30 miles away. Porter listened, arms crossed, face impassive. When she finished, he shook his head. "I feel for you, Miss Vance. I do, but business is tight right now. I can't spare $10. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for an investment. If we keep the spring, you keep your customers who depend on that water. If we lose it, they go elsewhere, and you lose their business too." "Maybe. But that's a gamble I can't afford to take right now." She tried the blacksmith next. Big man named Hurst with arms like tree trunks and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. $10 is a lot of money," he said. "I know. And even if I gave it to you, what's to stop Webb from coming after you again next month? Or Crow's people from burning you out?" "Nothing, but we'll deal with that when it happens." "That's not much of a guarantee." "It's the only one I can give you." Hurst studied her for a long moment. "I respect what you're trying to do out there, but I can't help you. I'm sorry." The hotel owner gave her the same answer. So did the man who ran the livery, and the woman who owned the dress shop. By noon, Nola was beginning to understand why Garrick had been reluctant. People were sympathetic, but sympathy didn't pay bills, and most of them had their own problems to worry about. She was standing outside the saloon trying to decide whether to give up or keep trying when Eli spoke up. "Maybe we're asking the wrong people." "What do you mean?" "Everyone you've talked to is established. They've got businesses and property and things to protect. Maybe we should ask someone who understands what it's like to have nothing." Nola looked at her stepson. Sometimes the boy was so much older than his years, it was startling. "You have someone in mind?" "The people at the settlement, the ones who've been buying water from us. They know what it's like to be desperate." It was a long shot. The settlement was 30 miles south, and the people there were barely surviving themselves. But Eli had a point. They understood desperation in a way the comfortable merchants of Redemption never would. "It'll take all day to ride there and back," Nola said. "We've got all day." They rode south under a sun that felt like it was trying to burn the world clean. The land got rougher as they went, all rocks and scrub and dust. By the time they reached the settlement, Nola's throat was raw and her clothes were soaked with sweat. The settlement was barely a town, more like a collection of tents and rough shacks clustered around a dry creek bed. Maybe 20 families, all of them looking like they'd been worn down to nothing and were still somehow standing. A woman came out to meet them. She was young, maybe 25, but her face had the lined exhaustion of someone twice that age. 3 small children clung to her skirts. "You're the water woman," she said, "from Hollow Creek." "That's right. My name's Nola." "I'm Beth Carver. What brings you out here?" Nola explained the situation. The debt, the deadline, the $10 they were short. Beth listened without interrupting. When Nola finished, she called out to the other families. Within minutes, there were a dozen people gathered around. "How much do you need?" Beth asked. $10. One of the men, thin as a rail with a beard down to his chest, laughed bitterly. $10? Might as well be asking for the moon. I know it's a lot, but without that spring, we can't keep providing water, and without water, we die. Beth said it flatly, without drama, just stating a fact. Or we move on. Again. The group fell silent. These were people who'd been moving on their whole lives, running from drought, from debt, from disaster. One more displacement wouldn't kill them, but it would break something inside that was already cracked. Beth turned to the others. "How much can we spare?" "Beth, we don't have—" "I know what we don't have. I'm asking what we can spare." Slowly, reluctantly, people started pulling out what little they had. A few coins here, a crumpled bill there. One woman contributed a silver necklace, the only thing of value she owned. "My mama gave me this," she said, "but she'd understand." Beth collected it all in a hat. When she counted it, there was $7.60. "It's not enough," the bearded man said. "It's what we have," Beth replied. She held the hat out to Nola. "Take it, and when you get that spring secure, you remember that we helped." Nola's throat was too tight to speak. She took the hat and nodded. On the ride back, Eli was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "Those people don't have anything. Why would they give us what little they have? Because they understand what it's like to need help. The people in town don't. They've forgotten. Will we forget when things get better?" Nola looked at him. "Not if I have anything to say about it." They reached redemption just before sunset. Nola was exhausted, covered in dust, and still short on the money they needed. But she wasn't ready to give up yet. She was about to head back toward the ranch when someone called her name. "Miss Vance?" She turned to find Nathan Reeves, the lawyer, walking toward her from the hotel. "Mr. Reeves? I didn't know you were still in town. Stayed to tie up loose ends with Crow's case. I heard you've been asking around for money. Word travels fast. Small town. You're short on Webb's payment?" Nola felt a flash of embarrassment. "About $2 short now. Might as well be $200 at this point." Reeves reached into his pocket and pulled out a billfold. He counted out $5 in crisp bills and held them out. "Here." Nola stared. "What?" $5. That should cover what you need and then some. I can't take your money." "Why not?" "Because I can't pay you back." "I'm not asking you to. Consider it payment for helping me build the case against Crow. Without your testimony and documentation, I wouldn't have been able to touch him." "That's not worth $5. "It is to me. Crow's been ruining lives for years. Getting him behind bars is worth a hell of a lot more than $5. He pushed the money into her hand. "Take it, buy your land back, and next time you see someone who needs help, you pass it along." Nola's hands were shaking. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I've seen what happens when good people lose everything to men like Crow and Webb, and I'm tired of watching it happen." He tipped his hat. "Good luck, Mrs. Hale." She rode back to Hollow Creek with the money clutched tight in her pocket, afraid if she let go it might disappear. The sun was setting behind her, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked like hope instead of fire. When she arrived, Garrick was on the porch, despite doctor's orders, leaning on his crutches. He'd been watching the road for hours, she could tell. "Well?" She held up the bills. "We have it. Every penny." The look on his face was worth every hard mile she'd ridden. He came down the steps, nearly fell, caught himself on the railing. How? The settlement, and Reeves, and about a dozen other people who probably shouldn't have helped, but did anyway. Garrick pulled her into a hug, crutches and all, and held on like she might disappear. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "Good thing you won't have to find out." That night they gathered the children and showed them the money, explained what it meant, that the ranch was safe, that they weren't losing the spring. Clara cried. Eli tried not to. Weston didn't understand any of it, but was excited because everyone else was excited. "Does this mean we get to stay?" Clara asked. "We get to stay," Garrick confirmed. "Forever?" "Forever." Marcus Webb arrived at Hollow Creek exactly on time, 3 days later. He stepped down from his carriage carrying a leather folder, his expression as cold as January wind. "Mr. Hale, I'm here to collect. I have your money." Webb's eyebrows rose slightly. "All of it?" "All of it." Garrick handed over an envelope. Webb counted the contents carefully, twice, like he didn't quite believe it. $547 exactly. For a long moment, he just stared at the money. "Well, color me surprised. Do we have our land back?" Webb pulled out the contract Garrick had signed, the one that put the western section up as collateral. He studied it, turning it over in his hands. "There's a clause here," he said slowly. "Says if you default on any subsequent payment, the land becomes mine regardless of whether the original loan is repaid." Nola felt ice in her stomach. "We haven't defaulted on anything." "Not yet, but you will. Everyone does eventually." Webb looked at Garrick. "And when you do, I'll be waiting." Garrick's face went hard. "You'll be waiting a long time. We'll see." Webb took out a pen, signed something on the contract, then tore it in half. He let the pieces flutter to the ground. "Your land's clear for now, but you still owe me for the original loan. $300 to be paid over the next year. I expect monthly payments starting next week. Miss even one, and we're back where we started." "We won't miss any." "Everyone says that." Webb climbed back into his carriage. "Enjoy your victory, Hale. They never last as long as you think they will." After he left, Garrick stood in the yard, staring at the torn pieces of paper scattered in the dust. His hands were shaking. "He's going to keep coming after us." "Let him," Nola said. "We beat him this time. We'll beat him again." "You make it sound easy." "It's not easy, but it's possible. And possible is all we need." Garrick looked at her and something in his face shifted. "I want to marry you." Nola blinked. "What?" "I want to marry you, properly, not just because it's practical or because you're here, because I love you and I can't imagine doing any of this without you." "Garrick, I know people will talk. I know it's fast. I know there are 100 reasons you should say no, but I'm asking anyway." Nola felt her heart hammering. "You don't have a ring." "I'll get one." "You don't have money for a ring." "Then I'll make one. Carve it out of wood if I have to." He reached for her hands. "Say yes." She looked at him, really looked. Saw the man who'd been drowning when she arrived and was finally learning to swim. Saw someone who'd been broken and was putting himself back together piece by piece. Saw someone who'd chosen her not because he needed her, but because he wanted her. "Yes." "Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. But not because I have nowhere else to go, because this is where I want to be." He kissed her right there in the yard, with dust on their clothes and sweat on their skin, and half the ranch watching from various windows. When they broke apart, Eli was standing on the porch with his arms crossed and a smile trying to break through. "About time," he said. They married 2 weeks later in the front room of the ranch house. No big ceremony. No crowd. Just Marshall Pike to make it legal. Porter and his wife as witnesses. Nathan Reeves, who happened to be passing through, and the children watching with serious faces. Garrick had carved a ring from a piece of oak, simple and imperfect, but sturdy. It fit Nola's finger like it had been made for her, which it had been. Clara cried through the whole thing. Eli tried not to. Even baby Weston seemed to understand something important was happening, staying quiet and still in a way he almost never managed. When it was over, Garrick kissed his new wife and whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" "For not leaving." "I told you, I'm not going anywhere." Pike shook Garrick's hand. "Congratulations, and good luck. You're going to need it." "Why's that?" "Because being married is harder than ranching, and ranching's already trying to kill you." Porter's wife smacked her husband on the arm. "Don't listen to him. Marriage is wonderful when you find the right person." "And how do you know if you've found the right person?" Nola asked. "Because they make the hard days bearable and the good days better. Everything else is just noise." That night, after everyone had left and the children were asleep, Garrick and Nola sat on the porch together. Married. Legal. Permanent. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Strange. Good strange, but strange." "Any regrets?" "Ask me again in 50 years, he laughed. "Fair enough." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars appear one by one. The ranch stretched out around them, dark and quiet and alive. "Garrick?" "Yeah?" When I first came here, I thought I was just trying to survive until I could find something better. I didn't know there could be something better than surviving. And now? Now I know that living is different from surviving, and I finally get to do it. He reached for her hand, the one wearing the wooden ring. So do I. The town talked, of course. They always did. Some said it was too soon after Sarah's death. Others said Nola had trapped him. A few suggested the whole thing was improper and unseemly. But the talking faded eventually, the way gossip always does when it stops being interesting. People got used to seeing them together, got used to the idea that Hollow Creek wasn't dying anymore, that the woman nobody wanted had become the woman who'd saved everything. Summer came hard that year. The drought deepened across the territory. Wells that had been struggling went completely dry. Ranches that had survived for generations started failing, their owners too proud or too stubborn to ask for help until it was too late. But Hollow Creek's spring kept flowing, and Garrick and Nola kept their promise. They didn't price gouge when they could have. Didn't turn away people who were desperate just because those people couldn't pay full price. They charged fair rates and helped when they could. And when they couldn't help with water, they helped with advice or labor, or just a sympathetic ear. Word got around about that. By fall, Hollow Creek had become something unexpected. Not just a ranch, a gathering place. A symbol of what people could build when they refused to give up. Travelers stopped there for water and stayed for conversation. Neighboring ranchers came to buy horses and left with advice on managing drought conditions. Families moving west camped on the property and departed with full canteens and well wishes. The ranch that had almost died became the place that helped others survive. One afternoon in late September, Nola was working in the garden when she saw a familiar wagon approaching. An older woman climbed down, looking around with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen a lot of ranches and knew how to judge them. "Can I help you?" Nola called, straightening up. "I'm looking for Nola Vance. I was told she lives here." "That's me." "Well, Nola Hale now." The woman blinked in surprise. "You got married?" "I did." "Good for you." She held out her hand. "My name's Margaret Ross. I'm from the placement agency in Tombstone, Mrs. Talbot's replacement." Nola shook her hand, feeling a strange echo of the past. "What can I do for you?" "I have a situation. A widower with 4 children about 70 miles south. He's looking for help, but every woman I've sent has quit within a week. The place is rough. The man's difficult. The children are half wild. The work is backbreaking." Nola waited, knowing where this was going. "Mrs. Talbot told me about you before she retired. Said you were the only woman she ever placed who lasted more than a month in an impossible situation. Said you didn't quit even when you should have." Margaret looked at her directly. "I was hoping you might know someone like you, someone who doesn't give up easy." Nola thought about it, thought about the woman she'd been when she first arrived at Hollow Creek. Tired, worn down, convinced she was only valuable when useful. Certain that nobody actually wanted her, just what she could do. "I might know someone," she said slowly. "There's a woman in Redemption, works at the hotel doing laundry. Name's Ann Grady. She's older, like I was. Been passed over for years because people think she's too old, too worn out, too much trouble. You think she'd be interested?" "I think she's desperate enough to try. But that's not the same as being right for the job." "What would make her right?" Nola set down her gardening tools and wiped her hands on her apron. "If she's willing to work harder than she's ever worked. If she can look at broken things and see what they could become instead of what they are. If she understands that sometimes the people who need the most help are the least able to ask for it." She paused. "And if she's stubborn enough to stay when every instinct is telling her to run." Margaret nodded slowly. "That's a tall order." "That's what it takes. I'll talk to her, see if she's willing." She climbed back into her wagon, then stopped. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "When you first came here, did you know you'd stay?" Nola looked back at the ranch house. Through the window, she could see Clara helping Eli with his reading, could hear Weston laughing at something, could see Garrick working with one of the horses in the corral, patient and steady. "No," she said honestly. "I thought I'd last a few weeks at most. I didn't know I was looking at the rest of my life." "What changed?" "I stopped waiting for someone to want me and started being worth wanting. There's a difference." Margaret studied her for a long moment. "Mrs. Talbot said you were impossible to place. Too old. Too stubborn. Too much trouble." She was probably right. "No, she was wrong. You weren't impossible. You were just waiting for a place impossible enough to need you. After she left, Nola went back to her garden, but the words stuck with her, waiting for a place impossible enough to need you. Maybe that's what all of it had been. Years of surviving impossible situations, learning to fight, learning to endure, not because she was broken or because she'd failed at easier things, because she was preparing for something that actually mattered. That evening, the whole family sat down to dinner together. It had become Nola's favorite part of the day. The chaos of it, the noise, the way everyone talked over each other and laughed and argued and existed together in the same space. It was nothing like the silent, grief-stricken house she'd walked into 18 months ago. After the children went to bed, Garrick found her cleaning up in the kitchen. "Leave it," he said. "Come sit with me." They went out to the porch, their spot, the place where they'd had 100 conversations that had slowly built into something permanent. "I've been thinking about expanding," Garrick said. "Expanding what?" "The horse operation. There's a piece of land to the south that's going up for auction next month. About 80 acres, good grazing. We could run twice as many horses if we had access to it. That'll cost money we don't have. Not yet, but in another year, maybe 2, we could swing it." Nola smiled. A year ago, he'd been planning how to survive the next week. 6 months ago, he'd been trying to figure out how to make it through the month. Now he was planning years ahead. "We could," she agreed, "if we keep making the payments to Webb, if the drought doesn't get worse, if nothing else goes wrong." "When did you become the pessimistic one?" "I'm not pessimistic, I'm realistic. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. A pessimist would say we can't do it. A realist says we can, but we have to plan for all the things that might try to stop us." Garrick reached for her hand. "And what would an optimist say?" "I don't know. I've never been one." He laughed, and the sound carried across the valley. "Neither have I. But maybe that's why this works." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Garrick spoke again. "Do you ever think about Sarah?" The question caught Nola off guard. They didn't talk about his first wife often, not because it was forbidden, but because it felt like walking on ground that might crack open without warning. "Sometimes," she said carefully. "Why?" "Because I want you to know that loving you doesn't mean I stopped loving her, and I don't want you to think you're just filling a space she left behind." Nola squeezed his hand. "I know. You loved her first. That doesn't diminish what we have now. Some people in town think it does. Think I replaced her too quickly. Those people can mind their own business. That's what I tell them. But I wanted you to hear it from me too. You're not a replacement. You're something different. Something I needed even if I didn't know it. Same goes for you." They sat together as the stars came out. Two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their separate disasters and somehow built something that worked. The months rolled forward. Fall turned to winter. Winter thawed into spring. The ranch survived each season. Not easily, but steadily. Webb got his monthly payments, every single one on time. Garrick made sure of it. Even when money was tight, even when they had to sell things they'd rather keep, the payment to Webb arrived like clockwork. By the time summer came around again, they'd been making payments for 8 months without missing one. That's when Webb showed up unannounced one morning. Nola saw him coming and felt her stomach drop. Unannounced visits were never good news. "Mr. Webb," Garrick said, walking out to meet him. "Wasn't expecting you." "I don't doubt it." Webb climbed down from his carriage, moving slower than he had a year ago. He looked older, tired. "I came to discuss the loan. We're current on all payments." "I know. That's why I'm here." He pulled out the same leather folder he always carried. "You've paid $200 over the past 8 months. Never late, never short. Most people I lend to can't manage that. Most people you lend to probably aren't as motivated." Webb almost smiled. "True enough." He opened the folder and pulled out a document. "I'm prepared to forgive the remaining balance." Garrick blinked. "What?" "You heard me. The loan is paid off. In full. As of today. But we still owe you $100. Consider it forgiven." "Why?" Webb was quiet for a moment. "Because I'm getting old, and I'm tired of being the man who profits from other people's desperation." He held out the papers. "This is the release. Sign it, and we're done." Garrick took the papers with shaking hands. Read them twice to make sure they said what Webb claimed. "I don't understand." You don't have to, just sign. After Garrick signed and Webb left, Nola found her husband sitting on the porch steps, staring at the papers like they might disappear. We're free, he said. We're free. The ranch is ours, really ours. No debt, no liens, no one waiting for us to fail. Nola sat down beside him. How does it feel? I don't know yet. Ask me when it sinks in. They sat together in the morning sun, holding papers that meant they'd finally made it. After 18 months of fighting, surviving, scrambling, they'd actually made it. That evening, they gathered the children and told them the news. Clara cried. Eli grinned so wide his face looked like it might crack. Weston didn't fully understand, but knew it was good news because everyone else was celebrating. Does this mean we really get to stay? Clara asked. We really get to stay, Garrick confirmed. Forever and ever? Forever and ever. Eli looked at his father with an expression beyond his years. What are we going to do now? What do you mean? We've been fighting so long. Fighting to survive, fighting to keep the ranch, fighting to pay Webb. Now we don't have to fight anymore. So what do we do? It was a good question. Garrick and Nola looked at each other, both of them realizing they didn't have an answer. We live, Nola said finally. We stop just surviving and actually live. What does that look like? I don't know yet. I guess we'll figure it out together. And they did. Slowly, gradually, the ranch transformed from a place of desperate survival into something closer to a home. Garrick started working reasonable hours instead of pushing himself until he collapsed. Started teaching Eli about ranching instead of just ordering him around. Started playing with Clara and Weston in the evenings instead of sitting alone with his grief. Nola planted a proper garden, not just for food, but for beauty. Flowers bloomed where before there had been only dust. She started teaching Clara to read properly and to cook and to believe that being a woman didn't mean making yourself small. The children changed most of all. The hollow, frightened look in their eyes faded. They laughed more, fought more, existed more loudly in the world. 1 year became 2, 2 became 3. The ranch grew. They bought the southern property Garrick had mentioned, started breeding horses instead of just breaking mustangs, built a reputation for quality and fairness that brought customers from 3 territories. Money was never abundant, but it was sufficient. They had enough to live on, enough to save, enough to help others when help was needed, and they helped often. When the settlement to the south ran short on water again, Hollow Creek provided it at cost. When a neighboring ranch lost their barn to fire, Garrick and Eli spent 2 weeks helping rebuild. When families passed through heading west, Nola made sure they left with full bellies and sound advice. You give away too much, Garrick told her once. Maybe, but I remember what it was like to have nothing. I remember what it meant when people helped anyway. We're not rich, Nola. No, but we're not desperate either, and that means we have enough to share. He couldn't argue with that. By the 5th year, Hollow Creek had become something remarkable. Not the biggest ranch, not the richest, but the one people talked about when they talked about what the frontier could be if people worked together instead of trying to survive alone. Clara was 11 now, bright and fearless, and absolutely certain she was going to run the ranch someday. She'd started working with the horses, showing a natural talent that made even the hardened ranch hands respect her. Eli was 16, tall and serious, with his father's work ethic and his mother's determination. He'd started courting a girl from town, much to Garrick's consternation and Nola's amusement. Weston was 9, still wild but channeling it into useful energy. He could rope better than boys twice his age and had started training a mustang colt all by himself. They were good kids, not perfect. They fought and complained and pushed boundaries the way all children do. But they were growing up knowing they were wanted, knowing they were loved, knowing that home was a place they could count on. That mattered more than anything else. One autumn evening, 5 years after Nola had first arrived, she and Garrick sat on their porch watching the sunset. I heard from Margaret Ross today, Nola said. The placement woman? Yeah. She wanted to let me know that Ann Grady worked out. She's still at that ranch down south. Married the widower last month. Garrick smiled. Good for her. Margaret said Ann reminded her of me. Stubborn and impossible and exactly what that family needed. Sounds about right. Nola swatted his arm, but she was smiling. She also said something interesting. Said there's been talk about expanding the agency. Training women specifically to handle difficult placements. Women who are older, more experienced, less likely to quit when things get hard. You thinking about doing that? Maybe. Not now, but someday, when the kids are older and the ranch is more established. You'd be good at it. I'd be honest about it. Tell women exactly what they're walking into. No sugarcoating, no false promises, just the truth and the tools to survive it. That's all anyone really needs. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from orange to purple to deep blue. Stars started appearing one by one, the same stars that had watched them fight their way through hell and somehow come out the other side. Garrick? Yeah? Do you ever regret it? Any of it? Which part? All of it. Hiring me, marrying me, the fights and the struggles and everything we went through. He thought about it seriously. No, not even the worst parts, because all of it led here. To this. To us. Even when I was impossible? Especially then. He reached for her hand. You know what I figured out? What? That impossible is just another word for worth fighting for. The easy things don't matter as much because they don't cost anything. But the hard things, the impossible things, those are the ones that change you. Is that your way of saying I changed you? You know you did. Nola leaned against him, feeling the solidity of his shoulder, the steady rhythm of his breathing. 5 years ago, she'd been a woman nobody wanted, arriving at a ranch nobody thought would survive. Now she was sitting here watching her home, her family, her life stretch out around her like something real and permanent. I'm glad I stayed, she said quietly. So am I. Years continued to roll forward. The children grew up. Clara did eventually take over much of the ranch management, proving herself more capable than anyone expected. Eli brought his wife home and started a family of his own in a house they built on the southern property. Weston went off to work with the cavalry for a few years before coming back to settle down. The ranch expanded slowly. Never explosively, never recklessly. Just steady growth built on hard work and smart decisions, and the reputation they'd earned for being people who kept their word. Garrick's leg never fully recovered from the break. He walked with a limp for the rest of his life. But he didn't let it slow him down much. Just adapted, the way he'd learned to adapt to everything else. Nola's hands stayed rough from work. Her face lined deeper each year, but she wore both like badges of honor, proof that she'd lived hard and survived it. They fought sometimes. Real fights about money and children and decisions that needed to be made. But they always came back to the porch afterward, to their spot, and talked it through until they found solid ground again. That was the secret, Nola came to understand. Not avoiding the fights, but having a place to come back to when the fighting was done. When Nola turned 50, the town threw her a party. She protested, said she didn't need the fuss, but they did it anyway. People came from 3 territories. Families she'd helped. Ranchers who'd bought horses. Women who'd heard about her story and wanted to meet the woman who'd survived what they were still fighting through. At the party, Margaret Ross stood up and gave a speech. 20 years ago, Mrs. Talbot told me about a woman named Nola Vance. Said she was too old, too stubborn, too difficult to place. Said nobody wanted her. Margaret looked at Nola directly. But she was wrong. It wasn't that nobody wanted her. It's that she was waiting for a place that needed exactly what she was. And when she found it, she didn't just survive, she thrived. And she showed the rest of us what was possible when we stopped trying to fit into places that didn't want us and started building places that did. The applause was thunderous. Afterward, a young woman approached Nola. She was maybe 22, with tired eyes and calloused hands. Mrs. Hale? My name's Rebecca. I work for Margaret at the agency. She said I should talk to you. About what? About how you did it. How you survived when everything was telling you to quit. Nola looked at this girl who reminded her so much of herself at that age. Why do you need to know? Because I'm about to take a placement that scares me. Widower with 5 kids, failing ranch. Everyone says I'm crazy to try. Maybe you are. Rebecca blinked. That's not very encouraging. I'm not here to encourage you. I'm here to tell you the truth. It's going to be harder than you think. You're going to want to quit more times than you can count. You're going to cry and rage and wonder why you were stupid enough to say yes. So I shouldn't do it? I didn't say that. I said it would be hard. But hard doesn't mean impossible. And if you're the kind of person who can look at broken things and see what they could become, if you can stay when everyone else leaves, if you can be stubborn enough to fight for something that matters, then maybe you're exactly what that family needs. How do I know if I'm that kind of person? You don't, not until you try. Nola put a hand on the girl's shoulder. But here's what I can tell you. The woman I was when I arrived at Hollow Creek isn't the woman I am now. I didn't know I could do any of this until I had no choice but to try. Maybe you're the same. Rebecca nodded slowly. Did you ever regret it? Not once. Not even on the worst days. Nola smiled, because the worst days led to the best ones, and I wouldn't trade any of it. The girl left looking thoughtful, and Nola wondered if she'd see her again in a few years, successful and settled, or if she'd end up being another story of someone who tried and failed. Either way, at least she'd tried. That was more than most people managed. As Nola got older, she started writing down her story. Not for publication, just for the children and grandchildren, so they'd know where they came from. So they'd understand that survival was a choice, not an accident. She wrote about the day she arrived and saw Garrick's disappointment, about the fire and the fights and the desperate scramble to save the spring, about falling in love with a man who was still grieving and children who needed someone stubborn enough to stay. She wrote about the people who helped, Reeves and his $5, the settlement families and their coins, Clara and her mother's hidden savings, all the small kindnesses that added up to survival. And she wrote about what she'd learned. That strength wasn't about never breaking. It was about breaking and choosing to keep going anyway. That love wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing someone every day, even when it would be easier not to. That home wasn't a place you found. It was something you built with people willing to stay through the hard seasons. When she finished, she showed it to Garrick. He read it in one sitting, cover to cover, and when he was done, his eyes were wet. This is our life. It is. It's beautiful. Parts of it. Other parts were ugly as hell. But we survived the ugly parts. That's what matters. He was right. Garrick died first, at 72, still working the ranch he'd nearly lost 3 times. Heart attack while mending fence. Quick and relatively painless, the doctor said. Small comfort. Nola buried him next to Sarah, the way he'd asked. Put up a headstone that read, Garrick Hale. He learned how to live again. She lived another 8 years after that. Long enough to see all the grandchildren grow up. Long enough to attend Eli's daughter's wedding. Long enough to know that everything they'd built would outlast them. When her time came, she died in the ranch house, in the room she'd shared with Garrick, surrounded by family who loved her not because they had to, but because she'd earned it. They buried her between Garrick and the garden she'd planted 40 years earlier. The headstone read simply, Nola Hale, the woman who stayed. The ranch survived them both, stayed in the family for generations, became the kind of place people pointed to when they talked about what was possible on the frontier if you were willing to work for it. And sometimes on quiet evenings when the wind moved through the valley just right, people said you could still feel them there. The stubborn cattlemen who'd learned to hope again. And the woman nobody wanted who proved that wanting was never the point. Worth was. And she'd had that all along.